I am Rebecca and I'm from Malt. So just to give you a short agenda, I'll just share a few minutes. I don't want to spend too much time here. And then the main event, of course, is Johan, who we have here. He's a senior cloud solution architect from IONOS. And I'll let him introduce himself after this short opening. And then, of course, we have time for all of your questions. You have the expert here with you today, so definitely leverage this opportunity to ask your questions. We do have at the bottom right a questions function. So I would encourage you to use this and write your question in, because there might be other participants in the webinar who have the exact same question, and they can then vote and also let Johan know that that is a question they have as well. Otherwise, of course, if you write it in the chat, I'll collect them all and share them at the end. So I'm a community builder at Malt. That means I'm responsible for organizing our webinars, events, and all of that fun stuff for our freelance and consultant community. And like I said, I'll let Johan introduce himself properly after. So Malt has been around for about 11 years at this point, and it started in 2013 from two tech freelancers who wanted to be able to give freelancers more choice about how they do projects, with whom, when, etc. And it's grown quite a lot since then. So just to share some numbers with you, today we have around 780,000 freelancers globally who have an account on Malt. Over 70,000 plus clients, and I'll share some of those with you after so that you know who I'm talking about. In the DACH region specifically, and I'm saying that because I'm sitting here in Munich and I'm working specifically in the DACH region, we have 57,000 freelancers. And just a little kind of fun fact or info, of this number of freelancers, we have just over 700 who've listed having cloud as a skill in their profile. So these are some of the companies who are using Malt to find freelance talent to complete projects that they have. You might recognize one or the other, but there are some big names, of course, here. And these are some of the clients that you could come in contact with. How does Malt attract top talent? So how do we get freelancers and consultants onto Malt? You have the opportunity to showcase your online reputation. So you have a profile that you upload and fill out on Malt. And the only job you really have to do is fill that profile out to the best of your abilities. Similar to on LinkedIn, you want to make sure you have all of those sections filled out, your About Me section, your portfolio. Really important one is recommendations. So if you have previous clients you've worked with who are willing to share a few sentences about your work with them, then definitely have that on there as well. You can streamline your client management. We have fast and secure payment. So here it says 3 business days. Actually, that's been up to 10 business days, but still significantly faster than some of the clients you might work with where you're still chasing payments after 30 plus days. We have a dedicated freelance team, which I'm part of. We also have a support team and whatnot. So a lot of people who are here to help you. And we have special offers and partnerships for our freelance community. IONOS being one of those who we're working with today. And I'm sure we'll share a little bit more about that later as well. There's 3 ways you can be found on Malt as a freelancer. One is clients will search directly for a type of freelancer that they need into the search bar, and they'll be able to find your profile. They then send you a message with a project description. You can say, I'm interested or not interested, and that will, depending on what you answer, open up a conversation with the client. We have a team, a project partnering team, that also works on matching projects to different profiles. So they're also working on the background. And then the last way is that a client may post a project, and we have a matching algorithm that will connect profiles to this project description that would match. So that's where really filling out your profile is essential, because listing all of the skills you have, certificates, etc., will kind of be like keywords in this matching algorithm. And that's it from me. Before I officially hand over to Johan, we do have a poll. Just two questions actually, just to understand who's with us in the webinar today. So the first one I'm going to ask you is, what is your specialization? And you'll see under the polls function that a poll just opened up. And we have a number of different answers. So we have IT security, cloud architect, backend developer, front-end developer, data science, or other as well. So feel free to fill that in. For now, we have one person who's answered, but I will leave that open for a little bit for you to answer. And I'll also open up the second question right now, which is, have you already used cloud computing or built a cloud computing infrastructure? Yes or no? So I can see under specialization, we have a good mix of cloud architect, front-end developer, IT security, other, a few cloud architects.
I may have cheated. I may have answered my own in there, but I've always.
So we have one. And then we have about, just over half of the people who've used cloud computing or cloud computing infrastructure before. But we'll just leave those open. And we at least have a little bit of a mix here of who's in the webinar with us, and almost 50-50 experience with using cloud computing or cloud infrastructure. Then with that being said, I am going to close my slide here, and I'm going to hand over directly to you, Johan.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that intro. I will complete it a little bit, give a bit more context as to who I am. But yes, hopefully my screen is popping up as well for you to be able to see. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Johan. I am, as my title suggests, a cloud solution architect, as some of you are as well. And for those of you who are not or unsure of what it is, what it ultimately means is that as part of the IONOS team, I will support customers in anything that is reviewing their architecture, understanding how to best optimize their resources, understanding how the platform function, and basically looking at helping them optimize both their costs, their performance, and whatever the key metrics are. Very quick background about myself. So I have worked for the last kind of 7-8 years now in basically the world of IT. Before that, I was a mechanical engineer. After that, I was in finance, and essentially went through a bunch of jobs before realizing that this world was for me. And spent the first 5 years of my cloud journey at Microsoft, working across different parts from consultancy to security to engineering, and ended up in architecture, where I then moved to IONOS for the last few years. So that's a very quick overview of me, but always happy to answer any questions you might have on my career path on top of the presentation that we're about to go through. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about IONOS as a cloud, as a platform, as a system, but I want to spend most of my time with you getting my hands dirty and showing you how the platform works, what are the functionalities we have, and how you could get started essentially today using our systems. So, simply put, IONOS is, say, a child from the one-on-one internet era that some of you will be familiar with, especially given that I see that there's a big German or DAC community here. But ultimately, IONOS is a combination of various enterprises that used to be owned by one-on-one, such as Strato, Arsys, Fasthost, etc., that make this global consortium of about 6 million customers, 32 data centers, with a lot of them managed by ourselves, built by ourselves, and also some that are co-located with some of the biggest providers. And ultimately over 100,000 servers, meaning that we are present globally with a strong focus on the European market, of course, because of that German nature. Now, ultimately, and I'm never a big fan of text, but I just want you to have that, especially because you will get access to the recordings and all this afterwards. But simply put, we are present across your development stack or across essentially your deployment stack, because we provide you with a private cloud, a public cloud, what we call bare metal cloud. You could also call it a core cloud, essentially services that are slightly higher level, which we'll get into in a second. But also we offer a large set of integrations with either your CI/CD, your GitOps, your DevOps, and your usual deployment platforms, as well as offering managed services from a infrastructure perspective that range all the way from your Kubernetes to your managed databases to object storage in S3-like type manners. I'm using the quotes because Amazon does not want me to say that anymore, so I'm being cautious. But essentially, we've created a whole series of offerings with, at the heart of it, that European element, but also at the heart of it, a huge focus on security. So all the data centers being protected by DDoS, with a strong emphasis on how we can start creating simply and easily our infrastructures with less need for concern of all of the surrounding infrastructure or security. So I mentioned we had 3 types of clouds, and kind of you can combine them in whichever way you see fit. And I'll start off with this bare metal cloud, which is maybe, as I see there's a few of you that are developers or front-end developers, you might be more familiar with this type of offer at IONOS, which will be things like you can create your domains, of course, but anything that is going to be your WordPress websites, your kind of lower SLA, more easy to use, fully integrated, built-in solutions for your maybe smaller customers, or maybe customers that have a very specific use case where they don't need as complex or as built out infrastructure. We then have a private cloud currently powered by VMware. Of course, we all know what's happened this year. Who knows what the future holds? But for now, with VMware to offer that kind of familiar cloud experience, or hypervisor experience for the users wanting to manage their infrastructure. And the one we're going to be mostly focusing on today is our public cloud, which is that highly scalable enterprise grade for which most of the larger customers, which we'll go into some examples afterwards, will use because of that sovereign cloud, but still allowing for the types of services you would benefit from in an AWS, an Azure, a GCP, an OVH, etc. And the gist of how we present ourselves and, let's say, the reasons why we are different, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I will again let you peruse that, but I want to focus on some key ones. And the first one being that data protection, that GDPR compliance, that desire to be a European cloud, which means that the fears that typically come with the Cloud Act in the US or other international, let's say, mandates or regulations that might dictate how the AWSs and Azures of this world need to operate, will not be affecting us. And I'm never going to say they're, the big bad wolf. There's always a use case to use them. But as far as our kind of prerogative, being a German company, that sovereignty, that ability to keep that data within the confines is why we've had a lot of success with some customers, especially in the public sector space, which we'll show in a second. The second bit, which I think kind of differentiates us from maybe the other bits of the competition pool, so the OVHs, the Scaleways, the Hetzners, etc., is what we like to refer as the personal consulting, but is ultimately that 24/7 support. Of course, that's kind of almost a given nowadays, but the ability to gain access to people like myself, no matter the size of your account. So to me, when I was working at Microsoft, for example, if you weren't spending above, I'm going to make a number up, 500,000 or more a month, very difficult to get a hold of somebody that's in the architecture or the customer success team, because it's not a huge priority compared to their customers. In our case, we've taken a slightly different approach where we think that no matter the size, whether you're spending €1 with us or 100,000 euro with us a month, it shouldn't matter. You should still be able to get that best experience and that proactive approach to navigating the platform. And that's something that I think differentiates us quite well from a lot of the others out there. And the last, and my personal favorite as a developer and as a kind of an avid fan of open source, is everything we've built is based on open source technology. And that means, so our hypervisors, KVM, We're using Kimu to manage it. Some of you may be familiar, some of you not. But the gist of it is, we know that you're going to be hybrid, or we know that down the line you might be multi-cloud. We even know that there might be a new thing that comes up that makes it a lot better for you to move. And I think that shows confidence in our products to say, actually, if you want to move away from us, we've made it easy. If you want to move to us, we've made it easy, because of that open source element, that there's no kind of hidden licenses, there's no lock-in, there's no proprietary technology that you wouldn't be able to use elsewhere. And that has actually been a big selling point, especially within the, let's say, developer cloud community. That's got it. Of course, we place a huge value on sustainability. We're 100% green. We've got plenty of years of experience, as I showed earlier. And overall, we offer a wide range of services that are easy to use for good price to quality ratio. But all of these things will be for you to test out at your own leisure. Ultimately, it's important to understand who we work with, as kind of Malt suggested with Rebecca. Knowing how the types of customers, the industries we work in, is quite important. I mentioned that sovereignty. I mentioned the fact that we are very in tune with that privacy side of things, and that is why we have a huge success inside the public sector, especially in Germany, albeit as well in some other locations. Where we work for the government with ITC Bund. We've worked with a lot of federal states using some of the largest companies like Dataport out there. We support municipalities like Com1. We've got some R&D with Fraunhofer. We are part of the Gaia X consortium. So as you can tell, we have a long list of German and strong kind of sovereign needs. And that also goes within the realm of what we're looking to target a lot of times, simply because we know that we have an edge in that field. We also are very aware that the largest companies out there that require hundreds of servers or even thousands of servers and a crazy complex infrastructure might not always choose to go with us as a smaller cloud. And that's, again, where we differentiate ourselves with that ability to provide that support to these, let's say, smaller and medium-sized enterprises that maybe you as freelancers are more likely to work with, or work with more directly than some of maybe the larger team, where you might be contracted into a bigger project for some of the bigger customers. And typically, the reason for that is because we offer that price competitiveness, but also they feel that they've got that handheld support that helps them walk through our platform and design what is best for their outcomes. And that goes all the way, of course, into the startup world, where one of the big philosophies is, if you're a European startup, it's a shame that you feel the need to go to an AWS or an Azure to get those credits, to get that support, to get that kind of, get your feet off the ground and get you running. And that's why we offer that kind of 5,000 euros worth of credits, along with marketing support, along with technical support, again, with the likes of myself. And we tend to work a lot with incubators, aggregators, associations, VCs, to help them work in that realm. So as you can see, we tackle a wide array, but there is a focus on the kind of underserved bit of the market, which are not your giants, but the companies that are just trying to grow, trying to get their tech off the ground. And on that note, let me change my screen share and go into the actual nitty-gritty of what I want us to cover today, which is the actual cloud and how it works and how to set things up and feel confident navigating it. So, by the way, we will take questions afterwards. If there's any burning questions, any things like that, feel free to post them, but hopefully we'll be able to answer them as we go along. And I will keep a lot of time for you to be able to ask them. And if you don't have any questions, then I'll just go deeper into the demo and we will see where it takes us. But hopefully all of you by now should be able to see my new screen. And the idea is that this is our cloud platform, our public cloud platform as part of IONOS. Those of you who are maybe familiar with us as a domain provider or others will be like, no, but that's not the platform, that's different. That's because this is currently the enterprise side of things. In the future, there is a high chance we consolidate, but for now, this is the enterprise grade solution that we have. And you'll be kind of, when you log in to your account, you'll be greeted with a dashboard, and that dashboard will show you your virtual data centers, which I'll explain in a second at a higher level for those of you that might be less familiar with cloud as resources. You'll have a view of your resource allocation, which are all soft limits. There's no actual hard limits. It's just more for you to control your budget and your spending and how you're provisioning your systems. And then a view of how to reach out to support, what is new. So we can talk about the AI model later. I've got a little demo prepared for that if we've got time and if you're interested. The documentation, as well as information on our status, if we've had an incident, if we've had a maintenance, kind of keeping you up to date. Again, standard procedure for a lot of clouds, but for those of you less used to cloud, it's that kind of ability to, in one frame of control, see everything that is going on. So what is a virtual data center and why does it matter to us? For those of you familiar with the cloud, I would liken it to an AWS VPC or an Azure hub and spoke type topology. For those of you not familiar, it is a logical grouping of resources based on how you want to do the networking around it. So simply put, every virtual data center has a dedicated internet access point behind which you can build up whatever architecture, as simple as or as complex as it is, single server or a whole plethora of 50 different servers intertwined in a complex way, but that need to share that same internet access point. And so typically, if you're thinking, how do I organize my resources? How do I know what needs a single access point? I will be at disposal to have these conversations. But in general, the gist is, do I have two separate applications that work autonomously from each other? Do I have two separate customers? Maybe as a freelancer, you might have customers where you manage different types of some of their different accounts. And therefore, you might want to separate exactly how they access the internet. Again, that'll be up to you. It'll depend on the use cases, but there is no right or wrong answer. It's just how you want to optimize it for what you want to do. And then you'll notice here there is this data center designer, and even the name of the kind of the URL is DCD. And that is because that is our, let's say, patented, unique user interface-based deployment. So let's get into it straight away. I'm going to call it demo because I'm not an original person. And you can then pick inside of the list of things where you want to deploy. So typically, if I think about the audience here, based on where we saw you were tuning in from, we might have a few of you putting it on in Frankfurt, a few of you putting your workloads in Berlin, depending on your customer needs. We have a strong presence across Europe, as you can see, but then we also have some presence in the US. So I believe one of you was tuning in from California, for which I'm very envious. But essentially, you might be going towards the West Coast with Las Vegas, or the next, I guess, is maybe less so. But anyways, we have that ability for you to deploy to wherever you want. I will deploy to London because right now I'm in London and it seems like a fun thing to do. I will create a data center, and what you'll see is that you're greeted with this kind of palette, this empty screen that just has an icon. And this icon is, as I mentioned, this internet access point. Is that ability for you to create a private connected architecture that still has access to the internet for your front-end applications, for your general applications, even if they're not necessarily exposed to a wider public, but you need them to be part of something more complex as an architecture. And so the kind of the differentiator here is, if you're new to the cloud, this is a very easy way to get into it, especially if you come from an on-prem environment where you might be more used to plug in cables in or interacting with things a bit more physically. This is a drag and drop interface. So the easiest way I can describe it is that my architectural diagram is going to be a 1-to-1 ratio to my actual architecture. And so you'll notice here I'm just dragging in a bunch of our servers into it. And that's because we've got 3 different server offerings. So we're not yet in the managed services. I'm talking about purely those IaaS server-based deployments. And I want to spend a very quick second to show you the different kind of gist of what we have even within the public cloud. We have what we call cubes, which are akin to what you might be familiar with as VPSs on our core side, or let's say the more lower end, lower SLA, slightly over provisioned, but good for development, good for testing, good for batch type workloads where you want to focus on that cost and it's not as critical as you might think. We then, on the other end of the spectrum, have our, let's say, our production level, our kind of enterprise level servers, where we have what we call a dedicated core. I'm not going to bore you necessarily with the full details, but what that basically means is that if I take an Azure, an AWS, and the other cloud providers, they have a physical server. You get some of the CPU from that server, and essentially everybody uses all the CPU at the same time, but they have a little scheduler on top that sits and says, well, if Johan, you've taken 5% of the server, you only get access to 5% of that task queue. We've done it a bit differently. We're like, well, you've ordered, let's say, 4 vCPUs or whatever it might be, then you will get access to those 4 vCPUs, and therefore we pin the actual core to you. And that basically means that it allows us to do things like self-healing machines, high resiliency, and setups. And then you, of course, like with any system, you want that in-between range of, I don't want the basics, I don't want to just test. I may not have a need for the Rolls-Royce. I want just a functional in-between, and that's where vCPU falls in, where you have that slight over-provisioning, that slight kind of downgrade, so as to speak, in performance, but at a more reasonable price, and also benefiting from the self-healing. Anyways, just wanted you to get a gist for the kind of, we can tailor it across the land, and the kind of the way for you to think of it. The reason I'm spending that little bit more time on these types of technologies here is because all of our managed services are based on this technology. We eat our own dog food in a way, and therefore, if you're thinking of pricing, if you're thinking of how do I spec, I don't know, a Kubernetes cluster, a database, say whatever it is that you might move into our managed side, it will be priced the exact same way based on the cores, the RAM, the storage. That's basically it. So let's say I've got this, and I'm going to call it, I don't know, my front end server. I can then choose the availability zones I want to deploy it to, i.e. the level of resiliency if I've got a complex system. The CPU architecture, you can leave it as default, so you can change it if you've got a preference. The amount of cores, as I mentioned, the one core is 2 vCPUs in our world. And so you can choose essentially however you want to make it. And right now you'll notice I have a skeleton. I have essentially a overview of what is the power that is going to be able to go into it. But I need to bring something else to the mix. So I'm going to attach a storage to it, which is going to allow me to have an image attached to it. And so, for example, this might be my operating system where, I don't know, I'll give it 100 gigabytes, and I will choose either to bring my own image. So let's say I've worked with a customer, they want to migrate into a European cloud, and I want to bring in, I don't know, my VMware image or whatever it might be. You can do so. I might have configured something before in IONOS and want to reuse it because I don't want to go through the whole process of setting up a OpenSense VPN gateway or a WordPress site or an Apache system, whatever it is that you might be deploying. Or if it's my first time or I need a baseline installation, I will choose from a series of Linux distributions, including Red Hat and Windows servers, depending on your preference. So let's say I'm a Linux fan. I'll do this. I can have my pre-saved SSH keys just ready to go. So for example, I'll link these two ones that I might be looking to use. I can then configure my password for my root user and essentially configure a bit of coding at the beginning so that if it starts up, I can do all of my apt gets, all of the essentially the setup initially of the server. Now I've got more than a skeleton. I've got an actual server that has a Linux operating system that's ready to go, but it's connected to nothing. So how do I get it to actually start being useful? I will use this little plus here, which is network interface card, and I will link it to this internet access point to allow my server, my Linux box, to be able to access the internet. And you'll notice now I have this network tab that I can go into. And first of all, see whether or not I want to enable any firewall rules on that server. So that allows me to say, actually, I want to control this. I want to be a bit careful. I want to refuse any traffic coming in, so any ingress. But maybe I want to make some exceptions. And for example, it's a Linux server. Maybe I want to allow remote access to my Linux server, for example. And you can control that quite easily, as you can see, with some predefined rules. You can, of course, bring in your own rules. And then let's say I've got a domain I want to associate. I might not want my IP to change. I can use a reserved IP or I can accept that it's going to be dynamic, and it might change if I decommission the server and reprovision it, etc. And that's it. That's kind of the gist of how you would build an architecture. And then I can go and start mixing and matching server types. I can link them on a private network. For example, if this is going to be my database in the background that I don't want exposed to the internet, maybe I do want to expose it to the internet, but just to give it that administrative access, not for anything else. So I might go here, add some firewall rules. I might afterwards want to start playing around with some more complex components like load balancing, or using that gateway to choose the routing. And you can start with this more simple, all the way down into a slightly more complex WordPress site that is load balanced with a GitLab runner that is deploying my application. So again, whatever you do, you can make it as simple or as complex as you're looking to do. And I want to take a second here to say that for those of you that are maybe more familiar with it, or even just the developers that, you know, you're thinking, this is nice, this is pretty, but I want to be in my code most of the time, that everything I've shown you is bi-directional. So everything that I deploy manually can be extracted into Terraform, can be extracted into an API call, and everything that I've deployed programmatically will appear visually. So you'll notice here it says managed by Terraform. That is because this entire setup is managed using Terraform, which, for those of you who are not familiar with this, is infrastructure as code. And it's a language that allows you to continue and write declarative code in order to deploy your actual infrastructure. And that is because we mentioned everything we do is open source. That goes as well in terms of the standardization we want to bring to our, let's say, our actual backend logic, because everything we do is API first, based on open API specification. We have an integration with a series of cloud tools from Terraform, Crossplane, Docker, Puppet, Chef, etc. Some of them you might be more familiar with than others. If you are a hardcore developer and you're like, I don't do anything unless it's Python or JavaScript or whatever it might be, we also have a series of SDKs that you might want to use. Personal preference after all. So I wouldn't typically use our Python one. It's not really how I think about the classes and how I like to structure it, but the Go one is quite powerful and useful. And you might find the exact opposite. At the end of the day, you have the full choice of using our APIs, using a manager like our official Terraform provider, or maybe going and picking an SDK or another one of these tools. I don't want to spend too much more time on this, so I will open up to questions. I just want to do a very quick kind of tour of our other features that you might be using today that you're thinking, oh, but you haven't presented it. You've just shown me some servers, and then I will open up for questions. If there are no questions, I will continue and I can show you some of the AI stuff, some of the monitoring stuff, some of the other systems that you might be interested in. But I really want to focus on giving you the time to ask the questions so that you feel like you're getting the most out of it. Simply put, we have different storage solutions other than your typical HDD and SSD. We have what we call IONOS S3 object storage. It's S3 compatible, and basically means that if you're familiar with flat storage or storage accounts in Azure, or if you're familiar with AWS as S3, it's exactly the same thing, low-cost storage, API integratable. In our container side, we offer a managed Kubernetes service that is very similar to the other providers' managed Kubernetes. We take care of the control plane, you take care of all the rest, and decide how you want to deploy your your node pools, and the auto-scaling rules if you want them, the connections, etc., which will also appear visually here. We have a container registry for if you want to bring in your images that then get deployed quite easily within our platform. We have some managed databases, and you'll notice then again that we have MariaDB, no licensing cost, Postgres, no licensing cost, and MongoDB, it's based on the community edition. We do have an enterprise version for those of you that want it, but again, it's that open source philosophy of whatever we can, we want to focus on giving you that ability to integrate quickly. We have an in-memory database for the caching that is Redis-like, and again, those terminologies of like I have to use because of this new licensing change. So we're not sure yet what we're going to do because, again, with a license change of Redis, we don't want to have to go down a non-open source based stack. We have Kafka as a service that's currently in early access. for those of you working on event streaming. And then for those of you looking to do a bit more of the networking or the infrastructure side, we have everything from a CDN like Cloudflare, but right now focused on Germany with that WAF, with that layer 7 DDoS protection, all the way to managing your DNS records and entries to your VPN gateways and etc. And last but not least, we have some virtual machine autoscaling. We have monitoring as part of the services you can get, and API gateways for you to use. I know I've just listed a lot of services. I'm not expecting you to know this. I just wanted for you to get a feel for the platform. And if you have any questions or are interested in me exploring some of them more now, please do let me know, because I want to open it up now to you rather than talk at you, and feel free to ask any questions you might have.
Thank you so much, Johan. We don't have any questions right now here in the chat, but we did ask our wider community earlier what some of the kind of, I guess, more present topics, pressing topics would be for them. So I'll leave you the chance to write your questions in the chat now. And in the meantime, I will ask some of the questions that we gathered from the community.
Sounds good.
The first one being around the future of cloud technologies. So from your point of view, perspective, or what you're bringing with you here, what new technologies and trends are emerging? Or is there anything that you see?
That's a very good question. And it's a tough one to answer, because I think it's even divided the IT community or the cloud community, in that, let's say 5 to 10 years ago, there was a huge rush to say, we need to get into the cloud. We need to do that pay-as-you-go consumption, OpEx-based model, changing the way we go about it. And actually what we've realized is over the last few years, because of the likes of AWS and Azure, and again, I'm not trying to say anything wrong about them, but because of the way that their technology works, you'll have a lot of customers saying, wait, hold on a second. I thought this was going to be cheaper because I'm just paying for what I consume. But because you're consuming so many smaller services, actually, there's been a reversal in people saying, let me go back to something a little bit more rudimentary, something I've got a bit more control over, something a little bit more infrastructure based, where my actual costs aren't necessarily hidden in the metrics, hidden in the monitoring, and are going to be straightforward. So there's that school of IT that's kind of saying, actually, the future of cloud is something a little bit more rudimentary, where we can control more of the components, and it's a bit more open source, it's a bit more flexible, it's a bit more hybrid. As far as new technologies, though, that come and that will affect the way that we do things, of course, AI, generative AI, LLMs, RAG use cases are going to be huge. There's no denying that it's going to impact all of our jobs, facilitating them, changing the specs of some of them. And that doesn't exclude infrastructure, because now with the ability to generate more complex systems, you also have the ability to start thinking about all the downfalls, all of your architectural decisions earlier on. As far as also the kind of technology, there is a big shift from the on-premise world, where you're like, I have my VPN gateway, which I'm connecting from one site to another over a private and let's say a dedicated connection over the internet, or I have a cable that I have in my data center that I want to bring into your cloud and bring it that way. And that, I'm not saying is going to go. I think there's still a big use case for it, but there is a shift in more cloud native infrastructure to leverage things that we call serverless, leverage things that are much more based on the actual developers' world themselves. And that will usually imply API-based integrations or calling through essentially protocols that are natively in tune with the coding and the development side of things. And that means that things like the API gateways, that shift of how do you control the traffic coming in, rather than saying, let me put some blockers at the firewall level and you're not allowed this and you're not allowed this. It's more going to be, okay, what sort of thing are you asking me to do? How are you interacting with my systems? And I will filter that traffic accordingly. And I think that that's another trend that I've seen a lot over the last few years.
Great, thank you. Lots coming up. And if anyone has any experiences or input, comments they want to share as well, pop it in the chat. We'd love to hear it.
Please do.
The next question I have for you is best practices for migrations. How can companies successfully migrate to the cloud without disrupting ongoing operations?
Yeah, that is, I think that's the $1 million question, right? If you figure that one out, you've got yourself a very strong business and a easy to use, especially as a freelancer. I'm guessing you get contracted quite a bit to come in and be like, help us with this migration. You're like, the customer doesn't know what they're doing. We have no idea where the things are. We need to figure it out. And I'd say in order to do a successful migration, you need to know what you have. That is paramount. And it sounds so obvious, but for having worked with a lot of customers, especially in Microsoft in my consulting days, where the customer's like, we're not really sure. This is an easy one to migrate. We'll move in and everything breaks, because understanding how systems are linked to each other, which one talks to who, which are the dependencies, is step one. Figuring out exactly the lay of the land. Once you have the lay of the land, you know where you stand. You know which one are the low-hanging fruits, the easy wins, the ones that you can test that migration with. So, for example, let's say I'm a municipality in Germany, and I've got an app that allows me to check my garbage collection time for the recycling. That is important, but might be less important, because worst case, I can call them up, get that information from a person. So therefore, that might be a low-hanging fruit that might not have an impact on other systems that I'm going to analyze first. However, if I'm looking at, who is registered in my commune, that is super important, because that is something that is going to have all the other information. And based on who's registered, they get access to this service, how they interact with this other bit. And therefore, it becomes massively more complex. And therefore, that classification of your workloads of which one are the low-hanging fruits, how much downtime can I realistically have if I am migrating, are going to be key evaluations. And then last but not least is the actual migration. What tools do I use? How do I figure it out? And that'll depend on how mature your systems are. So let's say I am super advanced. I've got Kubernetes everywhere. I've got everything that is in a Docker image. Everything is great. Sure. In principle, super easy. Spin up another Kubernetes cluster, for example, using our managed Kubernetes. Have the pods run because they're already configured for your Docker images, and just repoint basically the DNS or the domain to point to our IPs. Done. Easy. The reality of the matter is at best going to be a mix, at worst going to be very old legacy 2004, 2008 Windows servers that have long since been end of life. And that's where the process of understanding, okay, do I need to lift and shift? If so, where can I lift and shift? Because not all clouds will support your older legacy systems. That's question number one. Question number two is, okay, I can lift and shift. Great. How do I do that? Is it worth it? Should we take the extra week, 2 weeks, month to modernize it so that we don't have this issue anymore? And so that, I'd say, is the last bit, is figuring out what tool is right for where you're at, both as a technology stack, but also as a business in terms of your appetite for modernization and change.
Great. Thank you.
If people are not asking questions and they're interested, I am happy to show a little bit more detail into our AI products, into our things like that. I might joke maybe more of the developer side, if that works.
Absolutely. I think maybe one question we will ask, just because I can imagine that's a question that's also for those who are watching the recording and whatnot. But that's compliance and data protection. So another big one. And then after that, happy to have you show the other demo. But how can we ensure that cloud solutions meet legal requirements?
Yeah, and that's a very good question. And actually, I am speaking for IONOS, German cloud, focusing on data sovereignty and data protection. But I'm not going to vilify the Americans. I'm not going to say that there's no use case for you to use them, because at the end of the day, even if you are a European company, a German company, well, German's a bit more different because you have to keep it in Germany, but let's say a general European company, and you want to be able to use some very modern service over here, but also need some sovereignty for some of your data, that multi-cloud approach isn't bad. There's nothing wrong with it. And it comes back down to classifying your data and knowing, okay, this is ultra sensitive. This needs to stay in Germany. This needs to stay in France. This cannot go anywhere else. Versus this act holds no data, but would save me 5 hours of work a day if I could just get that line of code running on an AWS Lambda, because it will talk back to my IONOS systems for that side of things. And so the first question I will ask my customers that kind of say, oh, we need data privacy, we need that protection. Great, and completely understand it. But for what specific loads? Is it something where you're in a heavily regulated industry, so everything needs to be compliant with that? Great, no problem. We got you covered. IONOS, being the German cloud that it is, focuses exactly and exclusively on that side of things. If you're saying, well, actually, it's just a part of it is linked to a German entity that is going to regulate part of our, I don't know, or is manufacturing some of the components for us, and therefore anything around the supply chain needs to be there, but the front end and the distribution and the actual e-commerce part, let's say, of the other bit of the platform doesn't, then that's something where you can split the workload. And so I think coming back to your question around how do you navigate that? How do you know to be compliant? How do you look at that? The key thing is understanding the data that you have today, which one has to be compliant. And as I mentioned, some industries say all of it, but some are a little more flexible. And based on that, you can start building a solution that makes sense for you, whether it's, I want to maximize my cost efficiency, or I want to maximize my performance and minimize my latency. I want to make sure that it's super resilient and will never break down, or as little as it can. And that will determine, do I go single cloud, multi-cloud, single region, multi-region? How do I manage that from that perspective? So it's very much around going to the root source of it and then building the components on top of that. And the truth is, there's no one correct answer. It'll just depend on what your appetite for multi-cloud is, what your appetite for a specific technology stack is.
Great, thank you. Then feel free to move into the demo. So those of you that are still here.
And please let me know if you do have any questions. Always happy to answer. Hopefully I haven't scared you off with any of this, but rather actually made you feel like it is quite manageable.
Can I drop your LinkedIn account in the
absolutely.
chat? Then I'll do that in the meantime while you get that set up.
Absolutely. So I guess the two other things I'd prepared for in the case where I did have a bit more of a shy audience today, or audience that thought, Johan, you've been perfectly clear, I have no questions whatsoever, then there's two extra things. There is, of course, we haven't yet talked about monitoring. We haven't talked about backup either, which, to be fair, we do have. We have an Acronis managed backup that is integrated in our data centers. And actually, some of our customers use that. Come back to the migration questions. We'll use backup agents to migrate some of their workloads that are less important, because they can go from 1 to 2, back it up, bring it up from their on premises into our cloud, and use that to restore into one of our servers. So there are, as I mentioned, plenty of tools and ways to do it. But I want to focus on the kind of the two big things we haven't mentioned, which is the monitoring, and the second one is the buzzword we all love to hate these days, which is AI. So I'll focus on the monitoring by saying that we are an agentless cloud. So what that means is that we don't want to have to install an agent on your systems, and we will not do it on your behalf. And that's a strategic choice, because it's, again, not wanting to extract more data than we have to, not wanting to add that little agent that is going to charge you realistically upwards of, sometimes for customers I had at Microsoft, 100,000, 200,000 euros or pounds a month. We want to make sure that that control is within your side. Whether it's a good decision, bad decision, that's not for me to say. It's just a decision we've made to make sure that the control stays with you. And the idea is, however, because we're open source, we like to create all of our monitoring tools to be integratable with open source technology. So in this documentation, I went into the developer reference earlier to show you the tools. But of course, everything that we do, from the easy drag and drop of the server to the complicated configuration of a in-memory database as a service, we will have tutorials, both at the data center designer, i.e. the platform level, and at the API level. And the reason I want to show you this is that we also have a whole observability suite that help you track the activity logs, the actual logging inside of the servers, inside of your Kubernetes, and a monitoring service that helps you pick up on elements. And for that, you will need to install some agents, because we base it on open source technologies, of course, you guessed it, but things like FluentBit and elements that are easy to integrate with open source things like Grafana's, like Prometheus, like some of these things that, if you're not familiar with infrastructure monitoring, all of this will sound like a very different language to you. However, if you are more on that infrastructure side, what this allows you to do is, from the base of it, start having very easy metrics and setting up dashboards through simple endpoints, wherein as part of our systems, we will give you an endpoint, and that endpoint you can just plug and play into a Grafana solution, into whatever you want as a data source, for you to be able to have a visibility of essentially your systems, how you've created them. So I'm realizing I haven't done something over the last couple hours, so let's see if I've done, there you go. Some peaks, understanding the full metrics and the full breakdown of all the system processes, the memories, the things like that. So there is definitely that monitoring suite that we do provide. It's just that we want to give you the control of how you want to provide it, rather than force it onto you and have those hidden costs and not give you the metrics that are interesting to you. And that being said, the last thing I wanted to show you is our AI model hub. So we have an AI model hub. I'll move the API over here, which essentially consists of two parts. The inference, the model hub itself, which allows you to directly through our APIs send a request to a specific AI model. Let's say it's all based on open source, so I'll get to that in a second. Or on the contrary, if you've got more complex use case like retrieval augmentation generation, so the RAG use case where you have a vector database and you want to use a chatbot that is dedicated to your systems or to your customer systems, you can also bring that into some document collections, inside of which you can get the embeddings. We use ChromaDB as a vector database. Again, if you don't understand this, that's fine. All you need to know is you can bring your own documents. We will do some processing on that to make it natively readable by the generative AI. And then you can integrate that into your processes. So that is essentially, if you want to use our stack and build it around our stack, absolutely, we have everything you need from A to Z to be able to do so. And as part of the foundational models that we have three key, let's say, sources of models. We have Meta's Llama, and that implies we have Llama, the 8 billion trained one, 70 billion trained one, the code-based one. I think we're working on the 140 billion trained data one. We have Mistral, which is the French company. And the reason for that is because we're a European cloud, we want to focus on European languages, for which Mistral is optimized because of its use of a lot of, let's say, European-derived data for its training. And last but not least, we have Stable Diffusion or Stability, which is for text-to-image generation. A bit less useful in, let's say, enterprise level for now, but still something that we find some customers want. And the second part of it, and personally being a bit of a nerd in this, I'm a huge fan of this bit, which is the OpenAI compatible model. And what that implies is, let's say I have an already existing setup. So don't be too afraid of this. This is, by the way, this is not our tool. It's an open source tool. It's called Langflow. For those of you familiar with AI, you might be using Lang already. The idea is it's a visual way that a no-code interaction allows me to build and set up things as I want. But simply put, I have a document. Let's say I'm a bank. People have some FAQs for me. I will split it and chunk it and make it readable more easily by my model down the line and send it into a database in a vector form. Vector form meaning using some coordinate points so that it can easily read from it as part of the model, and therefore save some space on the storage, be more optimized for similarity searches, and essentially help you say, well, actually, Johan has asked what are the coolest thing to do in London. That is a super subjective statement. So how do we assimilate that value? How do we get that information into similar types of fields of what other people might have said in our documentation? So that's kind of the ability to do what you call semantic search, or it's kind of empowering it. And then you have the second part, which is, oh, I've got a question, whatever that question might be on the banking site. Go and check if you find any documents that match it, change that into a data, like a text format, and then feed that into, and in this case, you'll notice OpenAI, even though I've just mentioned, no, it's IONOS. Why is it something that says OpenAI? And then give me an output. And that's the beauty, is that if you're using OpenAI, which most people getting started with these generative AI will have used OpenAI, you can literally use the exact same system. You can, and this is why I like the visual thing, you can literally keep the same components. And all you have to do is inside of the parameters, change it to point to our URL. IONOS rather than OpenAI. You of course then use our token, our, let's say, keys to be able to access it. And then you can start bringing whichever model. So in this case, I've just configured the Llama Meta one for the 70 billion, but you can bring in the Mistral, you can bring in whichever you want. And so the beauty of it is, as you'll notice, I haven't changed anything to my code. My code is still the exact same no matter what I do, but I can now actually just plug and play. IONOS is sovereign, Germany hosted, doesn't send any metadata for any of the metas or the OpenAIs to train afterwards, and purely sovereign AI solution for my LLMs, which again, if we come back to the types of customer use cases we were talking about, becomes primordial for them to be able to guarantee that security, and has been a big deterrent for some of these bigger companies to get into the AI space. And so you'll notice here, I'll go, how long does a one-time password last in your system? What it will do is that it will go in the background, is going to query that database, which has all of the FAQs that answer that, is then going to go and say, okay, based on this context, give me an answer to this question using the Llama. So it will formulate it, and in this case, quite simply, because it's a yes or not a yes or no, but a what is the actual criteria you're giving me, and then it will give it to you and an answer. Reason it's taken a bit of time, by the way, so you'll notice this is the correct answer. It is what is on the document. The reason it took a bit of time, by the way, is simply because the database is in the US. It's not optimized. I haven't done anything. It's just to show you that you can plug and play into whatever solution you currently have. And I believe this brings us to the end. And so I will stop sharing my screen. But if you have any last minute questions, anything at all, feel free to ask. I'm always happy to answer. And otherwise, reach out to me on LinkedIn and feel free to connect.
Thank you so much. I see one person is typing. It might be just a thank you. Yes, thank you, Evan. Thank you so much for joining us today, bringing your insights, all of the demos. I think that's incredibly valuable information, and I'm sure everyone watching the recording will be thinking that as well. Yeah, we hope to maybe see you again in the future.
Happy to. Always happy to.
Amazing. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, once again, I linked, I was saying Johan the whole time, but now you said your name, Johan. So
my parents disagree. I will respond to anything close to that. My mum being Swedish, it's Johan. My dad being French, it's Johan. So
okay.
Somewhere in between, I'll answer.
Perfect. Well, your LinkedIn is there, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out.
Please do.
And if you have any questions about Malt, feel free to reach out to me as well. Have a wonderful day wherever in the world you are, everyone, and we'll see you soon.
Awesome.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.